That was a panic situation. I thought I'd be out here holding one hand in the left side and shaking hand with the other hand. Fortunately, I'm here. I'd like to thank the board of directors, of course, of the Tennessee Museum of Aviation for this honor. That's something I'll treasure the rest of my life, and I really appreciate it. And I'd like to offer a special thanks to Neil Melton and Bob Hunter for establishing and founding this museum. It is a wonderful place. And I looked around the hangar, I walked around earlier, and I've flown 7 of these airplanes. And they're just like it's like old home week. I can think of nothing better than to wake up each morning surrounded by these beautiful old birds. Many of them, flown most of them, in fact. As far back as I can remember, I wanted to fly airplanes. When I was 10 years old, there's a World War Jenny, an old biplane used for training in World War I. Landed in Cotton Patch, where I happened to be at the time. And he got out. He had on these blousy pants that they wore in World War I, and boots up to the ankles, up to the knees. He had a leather jacket on, and a helmet, and goggles, and a scarf. Now that got my eye. I mean, anything in the world could have gone up in an airplane. He said, "I'll take anybody up for $2. You know, I was 10 years old, and it was 1933. I'm an elder citizen now. I hadn't seen $2 in my whole life at that time at one time. So I didn't get to go up, but my chance came about 8 years later. And World War II was just around the corner, and they ran an experimental class, and I fortunately made the cut on it and got to go through flight training, and I was a fighter pilot in World War II. I flew some of these planes back in the back in World War II. I think at this time I probably should recognize my family. They're all just about here. And I won't name all of them, but they're not a stranger to aviation. As you know, my son has been with FedEx for 31 years. He's been in charge of flight operations for about 25. His wife is a long-time American flight attendant. And I have a granddaughter here that flies for Southwest. Who else do I got? I've been around aviation so long. It's normal for me. When the war was over, I was put into the training command and to teach precision instrument flying, and I never got out of that job. I spent 6 years doing that. And one thing that I heard tonight is really true. You've got to trust your instruments, and you've got to know what you're doing when you're flying in weather. In 1948 and 49 was the first time the jets were introduced into the Air Force, the jet fighters. And at that time, just like the airlines, I believe, they had a manual or a book for everything you did. But they'd never written one for jet flying. And they assigned myself and one other guy to do some testing on it, and it was quite interesting. And number one was to be able to get from high altitude at high speed down to the ground and make an approach without getting somebody else's backyard. And it was quite interesting. The other thing was that the military thought, and I think they still do, that if you're going to have to go from point A to point B, it doesn't matter what the weather is, you're going to fly through it. That was before we had any of the current day precision instruments and before we had any radar. So I think during that time, I went up and flew in all different conditions into weather. And I think I hit lightning in 10 months. I hit the lightning 11 times in an airplane. And I don't recommend flying through thunderstorms, but it can be done. Well, I was fortunate later to get back into the fighter field, and stayed in it for many years. And I learned a lot because I was still flying and instructing and teaching pilots. And in fact, I taught pilots from, I think it was 7 different countries in addition to our own pilots in the Air Force. And they were like just like any other pilot. They loved aviation, and they spoke the same language when it came to flying. I had several interesting assignments, a little bit different from the normal military career. I never flew civilian airlines, but I did have some good assignments. I'm surprised that I ran into many friends that I used to serve with and fly with here tonight. And I'd like to mention at least 3 of them. Back when I was flying the 104, I had a crew chief. That was 49 years ago before I was doing this. He was like an old mother hen. Every time I went out to fly a plane, he would likely say, you be careful, don't you hurt my airplane. He owned that thing. He's here tonight. Dennis Lively, thank you for coming. And back in 1952, I was in Germany, and we were flying jets, some of the old ones, and later we got some new ones, like this 86 sitting back here. And you've already heard of Bob Gilliland, but he and I were flying together in those days. And later we flew the 104 together. And then he deserted me completely and went to work for Lockheed. They claimed to pay him a little more money doing that, I'm not sure. But he's quite famous, and he flew the first flight on the Blackbird, SR-71. I used to cruise around at Mach 2 myself, but Mach 3 is a simple thing for him. Bob, thank you for coming. One other friend of mine is Ed Gildy. Ed has just retired from Northwest Airlines, but Ed flew the SR-71 and holds several speed records in it. He holds the record from the West Coast to the East Coast and 2 or 3 others. Ed, I appreciate you coming. I'll have to tell you about one assignment. It was a hardship assignment, I thought. I was one of 5 lieutenant colonels in the Air Force, currently 104 Starfighter, and I was sent to Italy. But before we went, my wife and I had to endure 6 months of Italian language training, 5 hours a day. And I was running a temperature every Friday night from that. But we got to Rome. We had to live in Rome, Italy, and I would go out at different Air Force bases. We started with one, and with my originally from Texas. We've been in Tennessee for many, many years, but you can use your own imagination as to what my wife and I sounded like with the Texas brogue she had, trying to speak Italian. I don't think there was many Italians understood what we were saying. But fortunately, all the pilots in the Italian Air Force spoke better English than I spoke Italian by a long shot. So we didn't really have a problem. One of my last very good assignments with the Air National Guard here. I came here as Air Advisor to the Guard and at McGee Tyson. And this unit, during the Cold War and the Berlin crisis, was sent to Germany for 1 year. And during that time, they were flying the 104